Welcome to the Rehabilitation Research and Training Center on Vocational Rehabilitation Practices and Youth online seminar series. The center conducts research and provides trainings and technical assistance which investigate problems, craft solutions, and design actionable strategies for translating research into usable, feasible, and effective strategies for transitioning stakeholders, which include VR agencies, policymakers, researchers, transitioning youth and their family, educators, practitioners, and employers. Our online seminars are designed to provide VR counselors and other youth employment stakeholders with short training lessons on a wide variety of topics related to VR practices and youth outcomes. Each seminar is conducted by well-respected content experts. Once you've watched the online seminar, you have the opportunity to take a quiz to show what you've learned. A link to the quiz will appear once the seminar video is completed. If you score 70% or higher on the quiz, you'll be emailed a certificate of completion for your records. If your score is below 70%, you'll have one additional chance to re-watch the seminar and take the quiz. Check out our website at www.vrpracticesandyouth.org and check it out frequently for new seminars, publications, free webinars on topics related to providing effective vocational rehabilitation services to youth and young adults, or to contact us directly with questions. The Rehabilitation Research and Training Center on Vocational Rehabilitation Practices and Youth is funded by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Administration on Community Living. Now, on to the seminar.
Welcome to the VR and Youth Rehabilitation Research and Training Center's webinar, Integrated Employment, Expectation, and Choice. I'm Laura Owens with Transcend.
And I'm Deschamps with Transcend. Our learning objectives today. First, we're going to identify the role and expectations and choice in transition planning from school to work. Second, we'll identify effective practices in transition planning. Third, we're going to become familiar with 21st century skills for college and career readiness. And our final objective is to distinguish between the readiness and motivation and exposure.
Slide 3. So where are we today? Well, we've come a long way. We've gone from institutionalizing individuals with disabilities to finally allowing them access to living and working in the community.
Just like all of us, right?
Just like all of us. We've gone from segregation to integration. But then I think we take that next level from integration to inclusion. I think a lot of times we think integration is the end all be all, and really we want people with disabilities to be included in society, included in work, not just integrated, because integrated is still isolation.
Well, and the other thing, Laura, is I don't think people in our field, people who work in our field, really understand the difference between integration and inclusion. I think we need to work more to bring that into the discussion and to intentionally differentiate what is the difference between integration and inclusion.
Absolutely, because there is a big difference between the two. Then we move from isolation to family and friends. So again, with integration and inclusion, we want people to build that social capital that the rest of us take for granted.
And particularly, this is a real challenge for those individuals with more significant disabilities, because they typically don't get opportunities to build their own social capital. Their social capital is really based around their family, their parents, their caretakers, and those people's family and friends. So giving people with more significant disabilities an opportunity to develop that social capital that with their friends and their family. And that, that's a real challenge too, but one we are certainly in a position to meet.
Right, because most people with significant disabilities, their social capital are people who are paid to be with them and family.
Mm-hmm.
So then we move from no school to free and appropriate public education, or FAPE, through IDEA. And then unfortunately we've gone from not employable to just unemployment rather than employment for people. Treatment to services and supports, and I tell people all the time that really what we're doing is about services and supporting people, not about treatment, not about programs, but service and support. We've gone from dependency to interdependence, and again, I think we set people up for failure if we look at just independence. People need to be dependent on other people as well in a normal manner. From no choice to choice, and then from choice to self-determination. So we've made some progress, but not enough.
Absolutely.
Slide 4 talks about effective practice in transition planning. And we know evidence-based practices are very clear that work-based learning while students are still in school have a greater impact on their post-school employment success.
And not only work-based learning, but that coupled with paid work experience.
Exactly.
And offering those on a continuum where you start with, the career development, and you start with introduction to careers and workplace and work environments, and then gradually move into work-based learning where youth are learning out in the community in different working environments, being exposed to different careers and different working environments, and capitalizing on those experiences to lead to at least one paid work experience before they leave school.
Just like the rest of us have.
Exactly.
Right. And those paid work experiences can be after school, they can be during the summer, they can be on weekends. And that leads right into vocational assessment, because vocational assessment has changed over time, and we're really looking at more of a person-centered, more of a community-based, more of an experiential kind of assessment.
Okay, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Okay, do we still use the term vocational?
In some areas we do. Yeah.
Okay.
In some areas we still do vocational. There's still vocational training still out there. But you're right, it's probably not.
Those, words in our field,
Yeah.
they come and they go.
Exactly.
And so I'm never sure whether that is still widely used or not.
I think they're in some areas, in some vocational rehabilitation, they still have vocational assessment as one of their services. They also have things like work hardening, which I still don't know what that means, but it's still there. So yeah, it's still a term that we use. It's kind of, I think, a little antiquated, but we still use it.
And work assessment.
Work assessment, exactly. And that leads right into the job exploration, because looking at community-based instruction, looking at exploring jobs and seeing what's available can build on that work assessment.
And interpersonal and self-advocacy skills training, and you can see the overlap between all of these different practices in transition planning. Self-advocacy skills over the past 20 years has really exploded into the curriculums of secondary schools. Thank goodness, it's about time, where we are intentionally providing instruction to students with disabilities on speaking up for themselves, goal setting, and other self-advocacy skills. It is so critical. Fortunately now, there are a boatload of resources out there and a boatload of curriculums that can be integrated not only into secondary school, but into adult programs as well, because it still is very uneven. I think that's the best word to describe it. Youth with disabilities in secondary school receiving self-advocacy instruction. Particularly, I have to say, youth with learning disabilities and ADHD and emotional disabilities who tend to be on the diploma track, who are in regular ed or co-taught classes, they're not given many opportunities to get that instruction and to work with their teachers. So one of the big focuses in a lot of secondary schools now is working with special education teachers who are co-teaching in classrooms of regular ed and special ed students to integrate self-advocacy instruction into academic classes. And that has taken on a bigger focus as well.
And ironically, self-advocacy skills is no longer just a student with disability. I was listening to NPR the other day, and they were talking about students going on to post-secondary education, and they had an academic counselor talking about how students in post-secondary education, not with disabilities, need to learn self-advocacy. And the reporter said, what's self-advocacy?
Ooh.
So it's now become an actual term that we use across the board, that we all have to be self-advocates.
Well, and that leads to the next one, student participation IEPs, because now they're IEPs for regular ed kids. They're not called IEPs. They're usually individual plans. I know the school system in Virginia that I used to work in, they were just implementing it for all students, because imagine that. They see that developing individual plans for students can assist in the transition. And this, one thing I will say about student participation in the IEP is, there was a big thrust probably 20 years ago on student-led IEPs. Student-led IEPs, that's what we got to focus on. And student-led IEPs are a marvelous thing if the student is in a position and is interested and wants to lead their IEP and can get involved. But there is a continuum of participation in the IEP. The most important thing is student knowledge of their IEP, student understanding of their IEP, student participation in the IEP to the extent that they are comfortable is critical. But I think people have to think about the wide array of options that are open in terms of being able to teach self-advocacy skills through student participation in the IEP. It's a perfect system in secondary school to teach self-advocacy skills and participation. And by the way, the student learns about their IEP, they learn what their goals are, they cut through the educational jargon, and they gain a lot of confidence and skills and abilities and can participate in the meeting in a meaningful way. Meaningful is really important, not tokenism, but meaningful.
And I think that with student participation, I think it's really important to remember that continuum. But I think we need to start early in elementary school. And then that way when students become in high schoolers, they feel confident directing their own IEP, because the reality is when they go to vocational rehabilitation, they don't have somebody sitting there helping with their individualized plan for employment. They do have to direct it. So I think that's a really good point.
Earlier the better.
Person-centered planning, obviously, we've heard that term, and you can do that in multiple ways, but really taking a look at that student, what they want, not what their parents want, not what their teachers want, but really looking at that person in the center of all of what we're planning. Parental involvement is still important, but again, the older the student gets, and once the student is their own guardian, parents play less of a role, but having parents involved in that process is really, really critical.
Well, and I think the other thing to remember here, and that I think as professionals in the field, we sometimes fail to acknowledge that the parent is going through their own transition process.
Great point.
And they need as much support, sometimes more than they're used, and they need to be educated. They need this education too about the transition plan, and being so emotionally connected to their child, it's tough. It's really tough. And I think empathy and compassion can go a long way, as well as education.
Absolutely. And then interagency collaboration, because again, transition is not movement from one place to the other and that's it. I mean, we need to really break down those silos, those education, vocational rehabilitation, residential, everybody has to come together, and we need to really kind of build those wraparound services and supports for individuals so that they can be successful. And then finally, inclusion. The studies show clearly that students who are included alongside their non-disabled peers in high schools, middle schools, elementary schools have better post-school outcomes in the end. Slide 5 talks about 21st century skills that are needed for college and career readiness. So college and career readiness is all the rage now. I mean, this is what we want all students to graduate to college and careers, but particularly youth with disabilities. And so these are 21st century skills for all students, not just for students with disabilities. So we're looking at communication. Now, some people with more significant disabilities might need accommodations or augmentative communication, but we have to, while students are still in school, provide them with a means of communicating their wants and needs. I personally think it's a crime that a student graduates from high school and doesn't have a means for communication. Leadership. So providing opportunities for youth with disabilities to have leadership roles. They could be part of student council, they could be part of the PEP squad, they could be part of leadership within their school that then could lead to leadership out of school.
Well, and also now it's so heartening to see so many youth leadership programs for, you know, some completely for people with disabilities, some for people with and without disabilities, and youth leadership has become such a buzzword for in all of education, and that there's no reason that people with disabilities can't be integrated into that as well, and meaningful leadership, not tokenism, not token leadership, but meaningful leadership, which takes work on the part of the adults to do that.
And not a special ed student council.
No, no special ed student council, no separate student government association for kids with disabilities.
Right. Social responsibility goes right along with leadership. I mean, we've got to teach students, again, you know, give and take. I mean, what I hear from students with disabilities is that they want to also give back. They're always getting services. They're always on the receiving end, but they want to be part of that social responsibility and giving back to their communities. Creativity, something that we all need in the workplace. So being able to think differently and outside of the box. Life management, being able to, you know, have a budget, being able to go grocery shopping.
Independent living skills.
Independent living. Teamwork and critical thinking, right? That's what we all want. We want our colleagues to be able to do. Employers want us to be able to do it. And then the last two, research, project development, and technical and scientific, those are really, again, looking at STEM careers and figuring out, you know, how can we make things better and work faster and smarter. Slide number 6, why is work important? Personally, I think this is the easy one. Our culture expects people to be productive. Our society expects that people work. What's the first thing that somebody asks you when they meet you? What do you do for a living? Work is a means for individuals to gain status, to really build their self-determination and achievement of personal goals, because you're able to earn money, you're able to do the things that you want to do. And honestly, work is tied to a variety of aspects of status, like possessions, being able to buy the things that you want to do it and not wait for somebody else to give you the money, prestige and power and control. When you have money, you have power and control over your life. And then influence. I mean, look at people who have a lot of money, have more influence in what they are able to do.
Well, the other thing is that work provides meaning for your life. I mean, we get a lot of our identity from our work. I mean, a lot of people do.
Yeah.
And, you know, especially if you find a career that you have a passion for, that becomes part of who you are. And to not have that opportunity to find your passion and to be able to work and contribute. And again, it is part of the expectation for all of society. There's no reason people with disabilities should be excluded from that.
Absolutely. Slide number 7, let's look at integrated employment a little bit then, because this is really the focus of this presentation. Is it a choice, or is it an expectation, or is it both? So sometimes people assume that integrated employment is a choice and that somebody maybe doesn't want to work, so we shouldn't make them work. But the reality is, it's an expectation. We all need to work. And unless you're independently wealthy or have won the lottery recently, then the expectation needs to be that you work. When we look at integrated employment on slide 8, it provides more choice. So when people say, well, it's a choice to work or to not work, or a choice to work in a segregated environment or to not work, no, working in an integrated environment gives you so many more choices and so many more opportunities, from construction to creativity to customer service to accounting. So when we talk about choice in integrated employment, it's really about making more choices for individuals so that they can really build on their interests.
Well, and I don't have a choice to work in a segregated environment.
Exactly.
So, you know, again, it's applying the same standards to everyone.
Yes.
Everyone, regardless of disability.
Yes. We have to think differently. People with disabilities want to be contributing members to their communities, to society, and so we need to provide them with the same opportunities and experiences that the rest of us, quite frankly, take for granted.
Right.
Slide 9 talks about the killer concepts when it comes to integrated employment. These are sort of my danger zone points. The idea of readiness, that people have to be ready to work, and quite frankly, I don't know anybody who is ever ready to work. If you think about any of your first jobs, you were not ready to work.
No, you just
learn to work on the job.
Right.
And this idea that you have to do pre-vocational work or pre-employment before you get that opportunity to work, pre means never. People never get out of those pre kinds of classes. Realistic, there's no reality police. If somebody comes to me and says that they want to do something, then I'm going to figure out a way to either help them do that or find a way to help them understand how can you do this and give them those opportunities. But it's not up to us as professionals or parents to be the reality police and say, no, we're not going to put that on your IEP or your individualized plan for employment because it's not realistic. And never kind of wraps readiness and realistic up into that idea that you'll never be employed.
And you know what, I think that part of this, Laura, is because I can see how this evolved in our field, because I think especially with individuals with significant disabilities, that a lot of the professionals who work with individuals with significant disabilities can't see the jobs that they would have in the community. They can't see what this person with such significant barriers in communication, maybe physically, what they can do. And that is no reason not to prepare a person for work. That's part of their education. So the people who work with people with disabilities to help prepare them for employment need to be able to see all the possibilities that are out there and educate themselves, even if when they meet the individual, they cannot make that connection on how it could happen. That's understandable in some circumstances, but that has to be surmounted by educating yourself. Okay, so what is the student's strengths, and what do they like to do? What have they done? What are they interested in? What can happen out there? And keeping an open mind to the possibilities and believing that it can happen and that it has happened.
And it can't be, can the person work? It has to be, how can
how? Right, exactly.
So a tip is when a person voices perceived what we would consider unrealistic choices, then we should focus on self-determination and self-advocacy. This is an example of a young man that I worked with who said, I want to be a rap star. That's what I want to be. And so we just started talking and sort of looking at, what do you need to begin to do if you want to be a rap star? What skills do you need? What skills do you have? What can you do now? What supports do you need, and who can help you? And that kind of helped him, and he's now working in a place that has all kinds of musicians, and they're making their demo CDs, and he's really happy and connecting with people. Slide 10 talks a lot about these employment readiness myths, because I think that readiness idea is just perpetuating everything that we do. One is that performance in simulated work environments is a predictor of employment and readiness. and success, and it's just not. We've got so many studies now that show that, and again, we've known for years that people with intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities have a hard time generalizing skills. So we could teach a job skill in a segregated environment, but then when they go to that environment, that real environment, they can't do it.
Right. And that's why we have work-based learning now.
Exactly.
And get them out into the community.
Exactly. We know work-based learning is more important. Productivity is a primary factor in determining employment readiness, and we know that that's not the case either. That employers sometimes are more concerned about, will you be here every day? So that productivity we actually know is also not a factor that leads to readiness. Employers have the same employment standards and the same methods for hiring and have inflexible standards, and we know every employer is different, whether you're talking a franchise, McDonald's, or Marriott, or you're talking a small mom and pop store. Every employer has different standards, different methods, and most are very flexible. That's why customized employment is so successful. And then finally, employers expect and want to hire the perfect employees. Well, that is in fact true, but if you look at slide 11, and have you ever worked with anyone who couldn't get along with others, or had behavioral outbursts, or was rude, or couldn't take criticism?
Chronically late.
Chronically late. And these are all reasons that we give for why people with disabilities can't work. And yet we work with people like this every single day, or have in some instances in the past.
I think loyalty is so important to employers, much more than protection.
Absolutely, absolutely. Slide 12 talks more about preferences. So employers are really more involved in the loyalty. They really want loyal employees who are there every day. And we need to look at preferences for individuals with disabilities. And this is one of my favorite cartoons where Linus says, I'd hate to have a job where you had to get up early in the morning. And Charlie Brown says, I'd hate to have a job where you stayed in the same place all day. And Lucy said, I'd hate to have a job where you had to be nice to everybody. And the reality is there's a job for each one of those individuals.
Right, exactly.
So when we look at slide 13, we're looking at readiness for employment, meaning motivated to work, that an individual is coming and they want to work because they see, and they're motivated for a variety of different reasons. Some are not motivated by money. Some are motivated by social, some are motivated by other things. I had a young woman years ago who was motivated by hearing her heels click on the linoleum floor.
There you go.
That's what made her want to go to work every day.
And they see their peers working.
Exactly.
I mean, that's hugely motivating.
Exactly. Some want to wear uniforms. Individuals understand themselves, their strengths, their skills, their interests. That's readiness for employment. Individuals understanding their support needs so that they can articulate. So it goes back to that self-advocacy and self-determination. Right. And then the ability to access those supports or find those supports or build those supports if you don't have them. So actual work experience has a large impact on readiness. So slide 14 talks about, here's what I hear a lot. What? No interest, no motivation? Well, here's the challenge we have as educators and VR counselors is that we start with motivation and say, well, this person's just not motivated to work, but they've never been exposed to anything before, or they're not interested in anything because they've never been exposed. That's that work-based learning.
They don't know.
They don't know.
They don't know what they don't know.
Exactly, and they have to be exposed.
Exactly.
Right, they have to be exposed to all different opportunities, and it starts in elementary school and middle school and high school. And then once they graduate, now they can say, wow, I've been exposed to all these experiences. Here's my interest, and I'm motivated to work because I like to hear my heels click on the floor.
Well, and also it goes back to expectations here. It goes back to, if nobody has the expectation you're going to work, of course there's no interest there. I mean, it depends on the environment you're in. And so you really, if you have the expectation for work, you see your peers working, you figured out what motivates you, you're learning self-advocacy skills, what your strengths and weaknesses are, you're being treated just like everybody else with the same expectations.
Absolutely.
It makes such a difference.
And that's how we all became interested in our field. Through exposure. We were exposed to multiple things in our lifetimes, and that's what built our passion and our interest for where we are today. Slide 14 15 is my favorite painting. This is an Escher painting, The Reality of the Employment World. I think so many times we set the tone that this is your job and this is your job for the rest of your life, and that's why we have people who are 65 years old and still bagging groceries, because they've never moved on to something else. Jobs and careers, I mean, a job should lead to another job, that leads to another job, that leads to a career. And to me, this is what career development is all about, is just going up these staircases and down the next staircase, and maybe there's a dead end.
And you're looking over the balcony.
And yeah, you're looking over the balcony, you're seeing what's down there, maybe I want to try that. There might be a dead end that you stop and you go, oh man, I don't know.
And you might fall down the stairs.
We hope you don't, but you might. And then finally, at slide 16, employment in the community should not be viewed as an add-on or something extra. And I think sometimes we do that in our systems, especially in education. Transition is not often looked at as, let's do this full-heartedly. We look at it as, well, if you got time, 4th hour, why don't you go ahead and look at employment? It really has to be viewed as a core component of all service delivery systems, including the educational system.
That's why I was really happy in a school system that I worked in Virginia when they put the transition plan on pages 2 and 3 of the IEP, because the idea is that the transition plan would drive the rest of what was on the IEP. And, you know, that wasn't always the case, but at least you're taking steps to make it a priority and to show people that this is really important. That's why it's up here, up front.
Absolutely. And you know what? You begin with the end in mind.
Right.
What do you want?
Exactly. Exactly. And what's the plan to get there?
Absolutely.
And that's how we teach transition planning.
Planning, exactly. So we hope that this webinar was helpful for you, and we wish you luck in making sure that there is employment choice and expectation. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to this Rehabilitation Research and Training Center on Vocational Rehabilitation Practices in Youth online seminar. Please follow the provided link to take the quiz. As a reminder, if you score 70% or more above, you will be emailed a certificate of completion. If you score below 70%, you'll have one more additional opportunity to re-watch the seminar and complete the quiz. Thank you.